But I think there's a big difference between popular music and influential music. And influential music has been hijacked by the blogger world that's creating their own agenda that doesn't have anything to do with the mainstream agenda, which is just a new business model. Again, call it for what it is. You know, it's the critic becomes the criticized eventually. What is it producing in the way of great world-changing music? It's not, because it's not designed to be that. Hence, the biggest advancements in rock and roll are in electronic music. Why? Because it's existing off of most people's radar. It's existing in these clubs and these underground situations, which is where the real spirit of rock and roll is right now. It's not with guys with guitars and girls with guitars. It should be easy to identify a 20-something right now that's getting it done, and there isn't a single one of them. At that level, at the level of a Kurt Cobain or a John Lennon or a Bob Marley, there isn't a single one carrying that mantle. And the fact of the matter is it's become a redundant issue in, let's call it, Western culture, and it's going to show up somewhere where no one anticipates. The next one's going to be in India or Africa or China, and it's going to blow us out of the water because that will be a real movement with real power behind it. We become so jaded in our images and our symbolisms and our reappropriations and movies about the 80s, and it's all becomes kind of cute and cuddly. Those images lose their power. I'm not under any illusion. What we're doing is really, really good music. It has an emotional value, but it's hardly revolutionary in that way. And now it's revolutionary in a different way, but not in that way. And I'm not under any illusion about that. And I'm at a point in my life where I don't have to play those games to pretend to sell records because I don't give a. That's where the power of this band's coming from now, is the place of non-fear, of progression into reality. We've had enough years of the kind of the rock and roll fantasy where it's been so overanalyzed. And there's winners and losers, and usually we celebrate dead people. I mean, I see where people who've died are celebrated, and I'm like, how about celebrating somebody who's alive? You know what I mean? At some point, we have to get off of death culture. We have to get off of retromania. We have to get into, like, we need people right now. We need artists right now. You think people in Greece right now give a about whether or not I still talk to my old Smashing Pumpkins band members? You know what I mean? There's a real issues going on that need to be addressed at the cultural and critical class, and they're not, because everybody's just falling into their cuddly holes, and we're running our increasingly diminishing businesses into the ground. At some point, somebody has to stand up and say, I'm going to do this different. And it's probably not going to be me. It has to be somebody with youth behind them, and it's going to come from a place that nobody expects. I have a new thought, which is there's going to be a rise of, let's call it almost like a third political party, like an independent party. There's going to be a new rise in music, which let's call it the independent party. There are going to be those artists which are not going to get on their knees and bow to either God, neither the indie God nor the mainstream God. There are going to be those acts. They're going to be able to sell plenty of records, sustain their business models, do exactly what they want to do, live great artistic lives with great integrity and authenticity, and they're going to find their audience. And it might be 50 people in China and 30 people in Malaysia, but they're going to be able to cobble together a business strategy where they're going to be able to do exactly what they want to do, and that's the way it should be and always should have been. And once those systems that exist realize their power is going to diminish, it's going to be very interesting, because they're not going to be able to control the narrative anymore. It's that simple. Same thing that's happening with Democrats and Republicans. They can't control the narrative anymore because people just don't believe it anymore because they've heard it for so long, and it doesn't really add up to qualitative music. The last 10 years in rock and roll has been very, very difficult to watch because it's just basically turned into a bunch of McDonald's commercials. So that's why I get very argumentative with the indie class, because if you don't let those bands rise up to the mainstream, that's what you get. And you need that kid in Iowa to figure out at 14 or 12 or 17 that there is a Joy Division, there is a Dead Mouse. That's critical to them changing their communities and bringing those ideas into their communities. If you get precocious and you only keep it, here in New York or here in Seattle or whatever people do, that's counterintuitive to what alternative culture is for. Alternative culture is supposed to be subversive. If you're preaching to the same choir and it gets cooler and cooler and weirder and more obscure, what happens to that middle class that doesn't really know about that stuff, doesn't live in that world, doesn't know the cool kid in school? And they end up buying that the mainstream is the alternative, because the mainstream is more than happy to willing to sell them copies. You can't kind of kill me off with bad press. That's already been attempted. No amount of feuds with other bands is going to do any difference. The music is the thing that endures, and I'm one person who's survived the gauntlet to get to the other side.